Hello and welcome to everybody to our last session here today on the RIDE conference. We've had fabulous 3 days of sessions and we are looking at, our session is called Transforming Education. Everybody will be quite familiar with the format. We're going to use the same format in this session, which is our presenters will spend 20 minutes discussing their topic, and then we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for question and answer at the end of that presentation. And so that's how we'll proceed. I have the privilege of having 3 amazing speakers here on two very interesting topics. And if there has been an organization that has been on our screens and talked about all throughout this year, it has been the World Health Organization. I think everybody around the world knows this organization now. For all the good, the bad, and the evil, and the progress that's been made. But we are now looking at it from an education perspective. We often associate WHO with policies and guidelines, but I'm really pleased to see here that they are coming into the educational forum as well. So with that in mind, I have 2 speakers who are going to talk us through transforming lifelong learning for health impact from the WHO Academy perspective. And I have Dr. Tana Wulji, who, may I say, is an alumnus of the University of London, so welcome from that very perspective. And she comes with a very rich background that is very impressive, in that she has lived experiences and a career of distinct leadership roles that have involved co-founding the WHO's Global Health Workforce Network and Gender Equity Hub in 2017. She's led the establishment of the Working for Health program from 2017 to 19 and its multi-partner trust fund to address the 18 million health worker shortfall by guiding and stimulating the creation of 40 million decent jobs. And Tana has now taken on as team lead for the establishment of the WHO Academy, which is a special initiative of the WHO Transformational Agenda. So we're really privileged to have you here, Tana. And alongside Tana, we'll be presenting my colleague and friend, Sally Parsley, who for over 15 years worked closely with us at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and she's probably got loads of friends at the University of London as well. And Sally is an active open education practitioner. She has proven record in design and production work, and has led health teams for delivering accessible, inclusive, relevant, and applicable digital learning experiences for diverse groups at a tertiary level and for lifelong learning. So I'm really pleased that since Sally has joined the WHO Academy from January 21, we are going to see some wonderful work coming from there too. So welcome to both of you, and I'm going to invite you to start the session. And I will try to discreetly remind you when 2 minutes are left.
Thank you very much, Daksha, and it's a sincere pleasure to be here and also to join Maynor in this discussion, and looking forward to hearing from you and learning together. As we've discussed transforming learning, this is really the time for it. There's no better time than a crisis to rethink the way we approach learning and how we can actually use learning as a better tool for discovery, for improvement, and ultimately for impact. So with that, what is the Academy about? It's about taking stock of what we already know works, and it's taking advantage of the evidence around how adults learn and how we can make the most of EdTech, digital technologies, to make the learning more effective, but also more accessible. And with that, we see this as a process, very much like lifelong learning. It doesn't end. And we wanted to draw from what we could do within the organization. We wanted to work in areas and spaces that we could spot an unmet need, And we wanted to ultimately add value in this rich tapestry that is the ecosystem for learning in health, because there are many important actors who've worked in this area for a very long time, and we see ourselves working together hand in hand with the very stakeholders. WHO has been working in learning since its founding days, and capacity building is a core part of our mission. And so what is different about the Academy here? What we would like to do is more explicitly bring in a streamlined focus and attention to the science of adult learning, to systematize that, and to also recognize learning goods as global public health goods. And it's that shift for the organization that allows us then to have a more systematic approach, a standardized approach around quality, a greater commitment and energy investment into social accountability and learning, and also following the story through. So not stopping at the point of developing guidelines or issuing guidelines, but really accompanying various stakeholders throughout the process to actually sense make those, adapt them, implement them, understand what competencies we need to drive improvement, and also to engage partners, communities and patients through that journey. And so it's a holistic perspective about all for health, and that we all need to learn together to improve health. In this progressive blueprint, we see there are three distinct phases. And where are we right now? We've just completed the setup phase, and we've switched into the startup phase, where we are coming out with our first set of learning programs, the foundation of the technology that we'll be using. We'll be using this period as a very intense, active learning period, where we are quite agnostic as to what we're doing and how we're doing it. Ultimately, we want to be guided by the results and the feedback, especially from learners, and to see then how we can best scale up what works best and what is our model and approach. A lot of what we're doing right now is focused on the digital, but we will soon have a purpose-built campus from 2023 onwards. And the goal is also to establish a network in partnership with leading institutions from around the world that can work together with the Academy, so that learning through the Academy and its partners are accessible in every corner of the world. Next slide. The approach, I'm sure a lot of this will resonate with you. This is very much, I'm sure, everything that's been discussed in this conference so far. So nothing really new here. And it's that combination of do it all. We know that one thing alone does not make learning impactful. You can't just cover one aspect of it. You've got to weave together these different inputs and combine them in a process that is going to lead to a learning process that is ultimately immersive and social. And that's very much how the work gets done and how the work is performed, especially in health, which is recognized as a high touch, high value, high human contact area. And in order to get to a learning pathway that is going to be impactful, we've got to scaffold the learning, recognizing this as a social process. The quality management aspect of this is key, and we would like to think about learning in ways in which we can combine various elements with all kinds of flexibility and variety. What do I mean by that? If we bring down learning into units which are manageable as stackable units focused on specific competencies, we have then the Lego pieces and the flexibility to combine them in endless ways, which gives us an enormous possibility to titrate, to adjust, to be very targeted in the sets of competencies we're bringing together for various roles or even contexts, and also to accompany this by a very data-rich, learning analytics-rich process, so that we can find our way towards adaptive learning, both within a learning program, but also in a more macro sense of where the learner and the professional is looking to develop themselves over the years. In terms of the outcomes we're looking for, we know that as all stakeholders involved in supporting learning, we are ultimately facilitating the acquisition of competence and how that's then applied as we get further and further up the chain towards transfer and the effects of transfer, where real impact is measured. Our input there is more and more distal, but we do believe that there are a lot of things that we can do that can increase the likelihood of transfer and the effects of transfer. And the exciting thing is that we are already seeing that in place with some of our early work, and you'll hear Sally talk more about that. Next slide. If the goalpost then is to change behaviors. And what we want to hold ourselves accountable to as WHO is the key mandate of WHO under transformation, which is what we're calling, in summary, the triple billion goals. We are looking at 3 very interconnected areas: universal health coverage as a foundation, protecting people and responding to health emergencies, promoting health and well-being, particularly their determinants and climate and environment, and of course, elements that are cross-cutting to all 3 of those. We have developed our first set of programs specifically targeting areas where we see that we're falling behind. We don't see many learning programs being available, and where there is potential to make enormous gains. And so what you see in front of you is really assessed against criteria of potential impact and where the unmet needs are and where we can offer value. So you can see when we're planning to release various programs, we take a sort of batched approach. So we group sets of teams together. These subject matter teams may have anywhere between 10 right through to 50, sometimes experts in the teams, involving colleagues from all around the world in different regions. And we bring sets of these teams in like 10 to 12 sets together as a batch. And this allows teams to learn from each other, to exchange, to support each other, to share ideas. But what's really fascinating is oftentimes they're targeting the same people, even if on very different topics, especially if you think about universal health care coverage and primary health care. We're targeting those same health workers all the time. So being able to look beyond your subject area and think about the learner as a persona, as a person, and what is that journey for them more holistically is also something we see of immense value. Next slide. Next slide. Sally, thank you. So when we are looking at facilitating impact, how do we use technology to support that? So we are offering both blended and digital learning programs. Some of these may be self-paced or facilitated or supported in groups. And again, you'll hear from Sally with some concrete examples of that. We are building the world's first open source learning experience platform in the Academy. We've got our own technology team doing that. We're looking to work towards creating an open source community at the beginning of next year so that we can bring various stakeholders together to innovate together in this area. And although learning management systems, there are a number of open source options out there, learning experience platform systems are often proprietary, maybe difficult to access or use. And so we see huge value in actually the organization investing in this as a global public good, as a tool that can be used to further learning across the board in all sorts of areas. And with the learning experience platform, it's supporting that holistic learning approach, which is more than just knowledge standalone. It's more than just still standalone, but bringing all those elements together to have that full experience and allowing that to play out across innovative spaces and new technologies like the use of mixed reality, simulation learning, serious educational games. This is where we see it going as we start to move more and more into that interactive, immersive, competency-based learning, and importantly, assessments where you can truly examine that, because that's a real challenge at the moment, is how we can use technology to allow us to understand whether competencies are being developed or not. Next slide. With the Academy programs, what we're focusing on are levels 4, 5, and 6 in this diagram, and you may be familiar with the learning transfer evaluation model. It's very similar to the Kirkpatrick model in some ways. And with the programs of the Academy and the ways in which they're designed, the learning goals are focused on supporting the learner to not just stop at knowledge, but really focus on that decision-making competence that supports the application of that knowledge, and ultimately how they're then competent to perform the roles that they are expected to do so. And that then is the structure for the learning outcomes and the reverse engineered design, let's say, for the learner to be successful in those learning outcomes. So when we think about methodology and approach, and I'm sure this is something that you are seeing a lot as well in your spaces, it's very scenario based. It's very much looking at the applied. And at this stage, we are really trying to see how can we use data in the engagement with learners in that digital space. We get feedback and also to provide feedback to them to see how they're progressing their learning journey, and offering the scenarios pitched at the right level so they get the practice they need to build their learning in the most efficient and meaningful way possible. And over to you, Sally. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tana. Let me move on. So we wanted to, yes, as Tana said, we wanted just to share some examples from our batch one, our first set of programs that we're releasing this summer, just to make it concrete for you what we're talking about. So I've picked 3, which is maybe slightly ambitious, so hopefully I won't, I'll try and speak calmly. But so the first one I would really love to tell you about is mass casualty management. So this is training that's aimed at building the competencies of the health teams working in emergency units, EUs, to effectively prepare and respond in those crucial first 30 minutes after a mass casualty incident has been declared, just by the scale of personal critical injuries that are arriving at the hospital at the time. So an initial first task for the team as they began to build this program was that the WHO had no guidelines or recommendations on the competencies that the team requires at the EU level. So they brought together, in this participatory approach that Tana was talking about, they brought together an international expert consensus to develop those team competencies and to build a syllabus that was both resource and context agnostic. So it could be tailored and applied across many different contexts and hospitals. It's also tailorable in how it's delivered. It can be delivered digitally and in person. But the focus of the whole training, as Tana was saying, is to focus on that scenario-based learning. So they use a simulated serious game. That's the approach they're taking. And plus the pre and post support to build that lifelong learning and help that transfer from task competence into transfer level 7. So let me just show you. This diagram shows you kind of the vision behind the design for the program. So if you read it from the top to the bottom, the first decision the team asks in a particular scenario, particular context, asks the teams to make is it feasible to engage in this learning online or not? So if it's not, you go off to the right, and there's an initial knowledge-based learning that happens to make sure the teams are at the right level of understanding to move forward into the scenario learning, the simulated learning rather. And then the simulated learning happens through tabletop exercises and also functional exercises. So those are like realistic in the field, or rather in the emergency unit scenarios. So this runs through over several days, and the training does not just happen once, it happens several times over several months, I think up to 5 times. So at the moment where the team are is that they are refining the learning design and the simulated game, the simulation through paper-based exercises, and I'll show you the slide in the next. But what really exciting for the future is that they're looking to scale up this approach by using digital. So where good internet access and capability are in place, the initial knowledge-based learning can happen through the LXP, and that they're looking to use mixed reality, so augmented reality, where your emergency unit has been visually mapped using a clever camera, and then your team comes together online to take part in these simulations virtually. Then once the trainings are over, the Academy team are staying in contact with the emergency teams to support them to implement the data collection, monitoring and reporting as they begin to apply their learning in practice. There's also support through coaching, mentoring and the communities of practice, addressing that social learning that Tana was talking about. So this is just to show you where they are. They've been rolling out the training in Somalia, Ethiopia, Greece and Afghanistan so far, with many other trainings planned. And the initial feedback is very positive. The recall tests over the trainings, which is those graphs at the bottom, show that the knowledge is staying, and that some of the teams are already starting to apply the principles in practice. The second program I wanted to share with you, I'm going to speed up a little bit, is Acute Respiratory Infections, Preparedness and Response. And this is another team-based training. This time, this is aimed at health emergency senior leadership within countries. So acute respiratory infections are just the viral pathogens that infect our respiratory tract. So I'm talking about influenza, COVID-19 famously, SARS, MERS. There's several of these infections, and they cause outbreaks and sometimes, as we know, pandemics, global pandemics. So every country needs prevent and control and respond to these pandemics. Historically, what's happened is that countries have focused on influenza. But WHO recommends that by integrating your strategy and plans for all ARIs, you have a much stronger response to, because you don't know which outbreak is going to happen next. And you also have a more sustainable approach because you're not duplicating effort. So this program is recruiting through the WHO regional offices, teams of 4 to 8 senior leaders in health emergencies from the Ministry of Health and WHO offices to come together to build their competency to develop these integrated applicable strategies for ARI preparedness and response. And also, importantly, to build their skills and competencies in collaborating and articulating the need for the strategy and advocating for strategy uptake with partners and stakeholders. So we've just launched the pilot of this program, and it'll be that's running to the end of the summer. And at the end of the program, each country team has a draft integrated actionable strategy with key recommendations and costings. And then the team are supported to transfer their learning, their competencies and skills into change and impact by finalizing and implementing the strategy after the program through continuing mentorship and also some financial support from the Academy team. So just a little bit. So just for learning designers, the formula for the training is a sort of 2-week rolling modular design. Each module has a similar format. There's some self-paced online learnings to build your knowledge so that the team comes together with similar adequate level of knowledge to start building their decision-making task competence. And they do that in the second week of each module through group work, where they are guided through to carry out a sort of quick SWOT analysis or situation analysis of their particular aspect of their strategy. Am I running out of time? I'll finish with this one then. I don't want to be a greedy part with the time. Thank you. And then they receive expert feedback on this aspect of the strategy, and they also build their competency by presenting back to their peers and experts through social learning and live webinars. And then there's the transfer, the support and transfer. So as I said, we've just launched the first cohort, and we're looking to improve and translate that for next summer. In 1 minute, I just wanted to describe a very different program, which is aimed at, I think, universal healthcare. So this is aimed at pharmacy and drugstore staff, and it's taking a very different approach. They've taken a very participatory approach to design clinical scenarios, which will help pharmacy and drugstore staff counsel and prescribe over-the-counter self-administered contraceptives like female condoms or oral contraceptives in a people-centered and non-judgmental way. And this is part of a larger vision to widen access to self-administered contraceptives around the world and address a really big gap in access to family planning for many, I think over 200 million around the world, 200 million women around the world. So we've had lots of participation with 50 stakeholders of various kinds. And we're just about to launch the self-directed online learning component this summer. And then we're going to start working with country-level stakeholders, initially Malawi, to roll out the program for that, building the task, competence, and transfer to practice. So that was a bit whistle-stop, and thank you very much for your time. It's a super exciting set of work to be involved in, and we would love to hear more from you. Thank you.
Huge congratulations for taking on what must be a mammoth task in setting up this academy, and I think you certainly win the prize for having a complex set of slides in this particular conference. We are going to wait for some questions to come into the forum, but as my privilege as chair, perhaps one of the things that I have to the things that have been raised within this conference is very often within the online environment where we assume a lot of digital literacy on part of the users. Tana and Sally, how are you addressing that within your complex platform and the delivery of the content?
It's a very good question, and I think it's a really important one we take into account, and it speaks to how do we design not just learning, but how do we design interfaces into technology that support learning. What is interesting right now is that many health workers and policymakers do have smartphones, and they are used to and very adept at using certain kinds of applications with quite high levels of expectations. And what is often the case is that when using learning tools, they may not have that same flow, that intuitive design to the product, and this then makes it very difficult or complex to be able to utilize. Last year, we released this mobile learning application that Sally mentioned, and we had the first version of the sexual reproductive health program on there. And it's very much based on things that people are used to doing, swiping, scrolling, it's very touch-based. The interface is not requiring reading of fine print, it's using color to direct people. So in having intuitive, human-centered design, building on heuristics that people already have is really key. But we are also developing very user-friendly onboarding tools within the platform as well, so that the learners coming in for the first time, even if they've never experienced that kind of application or technology, can do so with ease. One thing that's been great is that we have experts from the team who are professional product designers, and they do take this very human-centered design perspective, which has added value, I think, to the way we look at this. We're about to roll out later this week wide-scale testing. So we've got over 1,100 learners from around the world who've volunteered to test the Academy comprehensively before we go live. And this is also exciting for us because we'll learn from them how to make it even easier for them to access what we've developed.
We've got a couple of questions here, which Linda Maricopa raises, is that such a wide variety of pedagogical approaches, are there knock-on impacts for the learners? Who can they perhaps utilize these approaches themselves in their community? So can there be sort of a cascading of the knowledge?
Sally, do you want to take that?
Yes, great question. Yes, I think cascading is we're all about scale. We want to reach everyone who needs this training. So cascading the learning through local trainers, and training the trainers is a huge component of our thinking about scaling up and also contextualizing the learning so that it's appropriate for the learners in their context and setting. Healthcare is so context dependent.
Iona Silver-Fletcher, who comes from RVC, the Royal Veterinary College here, and she's asking, the participatory model of counselling and prescribing practices looks very interesting. How easily can this course model be transferred to address other issues such as antimicrobial resistance, so that the counter prescribing can be made more responsible? I mean, this is very much down the medical route that we've gone with this question, but I think it's a very important view on how can we take this kind of thinking to other areas in that online environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an excellent observation that we will find a lot of ways in which we can apply these techniques in very diverse areas, in fact, and even with very different contexts and settings. In the end, it's that philosophy of, isn't this a dance or a partnership between health workers and patients and communities? And if that's the case, we have to recognize that the behavior has to engage on both sides. And so for health workers, what are those behavioral changes we're looking for? So not just building up their knowledge, but their actual, their practice and the way that they work with others. Similarly, we're about to initiate a new set of programs, which we'll be working with Sally on as well, around self-care, which is very exciting because here, and I think this also is relevant to the AMR issue as well, in how we actually support those in the community to better understand and self-manage their own health, and also to understand when they need what kind of healthcare and when certain things are not actually necessary or required. So it's that holistic concept of education that at the end of the day, if we want a particular outcome, we've got to support the learning agendas of all those involved.
I think one final question before we move on to the next presentation, and that is WHO has often been perceived as something that's for low and middle income countries and not really for the health agenda within developed economies. The WHO Academy has to work across that. What's the approach that you envisage you might have to take to advocate a change in that thinking?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a perceptual issue, and I think no more critical moment than this pandemic, where we've really highlighted how universal health issues are, and that these separations we have in mind about developed or less developed are not as not the way that we perhaps really had originally conceived them. And we have so much to learn from each other that it's actually been, I think, a truly humbling experience for everybody to recognize how much we actually have in common and how little truly separates us. And in that respect, if we think about learning and the agenda here, competencies are very much common, regardless of context. And when we think about transfer of learning, we're supporting learners to be autonomous, to be able to address the context in the way that they need to, that is culturally appropriate and relevant to their setting. But the competencies behind that, fueling that, supporting that, enabling that, are fundamentally the same. And with mass casualty management, we see that play out. We've worked with teams in Greece. We've been invited to come to the Netherlands, even to Ireland, all parts of Europe, as well as Central Asia, as well as Afghanistan, Yemen, these other countries who are in very, very different situations. But if we focus on that learning agenda of how do we support those competencies for teams to work together with whatever they have to the best of their ability, that is the outcome we're striving for. And I hope that as we move forward with the Academy, we'll continue to be able to show that this is really for everyone, regardless of where you're from or where you're looking to apply it.
Thank you so much for that presentation and the questions. There are some more questions, and if I can invite you to answer them directly onto the Q&A board, that'd be great. But I'd like to now go on to invite our next speaker for this session, and that is Maynor Amador, who is from the University of Distance Education in Costa Rica. He is a researcher with an emphasis on literary studies, linguistic studies, and historical studies. And at the University of Distance Education in Costa Rica, Maynor is the coordinator of the International Network of Research in Distance, Online, and Open Education, and is a researcher with the Student Observatory there. He works with networks that look at machine learning and artificial intelligence, a network of positive and inclusive education, and the International Academy Network for Organizational Studies in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, Maynor, I'd really like to invite you to take us through your presentation, which is on reimagining social learning in Latin America, the digital transformation in the heart of collective learning. So welcome, Maynor.
Thank you very much, Daksha, and thank you very much, Tana and Sally, for that wonderful presentation. I'm happy to see that some of the programs are being implemented also here in Costa Rica, so that's good news too. Good. Well, the topic of my presentation is about a project in the making that we had been interested in performing since 2018, when we first talked about this topic, about asking ourselves how social collectives in Latin America were in the process of appropriation of digital technologies and fundamentals of distance and online education to perform their own educational and learning agendas. We wanted to know, we were asking then ourselves, if these collectives in Latin America were being effective in implementing technology into their social learning and community learning and educational agendas. And well, we imagine at the moment that the answer was going to be yes. I mean, probably these social collectives were considering implementing technology, ICTs into their learning experiences. But well, we wanted to get closer to the topic and imagine these new scenarios of we were interested in getting the picture of how these social collectives were doing in this integration of technology. But suddenly we realized that there is a change in the paradigm, not only in terms of the application of ICTs in formal educational contexts, but now we are talking about this whole new realm of digital transformation. And then the question was then, are these collectives also concerned, aware of this transformation of paradigms, moving from the application of ICTs into the whole idea of digital transformation? And then the pandemic came in and sort of delayed kind of the put into practice of the project, but we have kept ourselves busy in analyzing at least the literature, and that's the stage we are right now. But first of all, we want to thanks to Alan Tate and Linda Anrain for having invited us to be part of this wonderful event, and thank you for to the Center for Distance Education for being for allowing us to share with you in this space. I'm going to talk about this project in the making from these different perspectives. First, how to understand this digital transformation, if digital transformation is a good start in our approach to collectives and their educational agendas. And then we're going to talk about what does it mean to the Latin American context to talk about social learning, and what is this social learning and collective learning in relation to collectives in Latin America. What are collectives in Latin America? Why collectives and social and collective learning is understood differently in Latin America? What are the reasons why we understand collectivity in a different way, maybe perhaps in comparison to other regions in the planet, like Africa or Asia? How are these collectives making this appropriation and empowerment of technology into their learning agendas? What's happening, and what are some of the propositions that we may be considering as possible outcomes of these observations that we are planning to do, and what does it mean for the future of collectives social learning in Latin American universities? First of all, I would like to start with the premise that right now there is a difference. There is a movement from one paradigm to another paradigm. The first paradigm in education and technology, the first paradigm is that so far universities and formal educational systems have been trying to integrate the best way they can educational technology into their educational spaces. And this is what I call the ICT framework, and that all universities in Latin America at least have been using for the last couple of decades. But now there is a different paradigm, and this is the first premise, that not only some universities are moving from this ICT framework, the simple application of technology into their traditional learning spaces, and they're moving into the digital transformation framework, which means that with the new technology revolution, there is a whole new of tools that are transforming not only the learning space, but the whole organization, educational organization. And this is what can be called the digital transformation framework. And the first question is, our social collectives are concerned about this, are aware of this, the difference in paradigm, are they still trying to cope with the first paradigm, trying to integrate ICT into their learning and educational agendas, or are some of them already, because they were successful in the application of the first paradigm, are they now using digital transformation frameworks to actually transform the whole logic of the collectives? For this differentiation, where we're using this recent publication for EDUCAUSE that defines what really is digital transformation and compares it to a simple application, not simple, but to a more traditional already application of ICTs into a traditional organization in a traditional learning space. And the first premise is that we are going to agree with this report that there is a difference, that now technology allows organizations to go through a real sense of digital transformation as a whole, and not only an automatization of certain processes using technology. And this is true also for educational, or specifically higher education institutions. Well, we want to see what is the situation with the social collectives. But to do that, obviously, the second thing we have to approach is what do we understand in Latin America by social collectives, right? And how these social collectives do have their own educational and learning agendas. And what are these agendas attached to? Why do they have their own agendas? And what is the historical reasons in why social collectives in Latin America in particular have been forced to develop their own learning agendas, educational programs. And I think that's basically one reason, but there are many reasons, some of them historical. I mean, at how collectives got to get formed in Latin America. What kind of collectives do we have? Because there's a large variety of social collectives working in the region. What are the historical difference between the different sub-regions in the region? I mean, why is the formation of social collectives different in South America than in Central America, than in Mexico or the Caribbean? What are the differences? What kind of collectives are we talking about? We're talking about collectives you are born into, for example, like if you're born into an indigenous community in Brazil, you're born already into a collective that is already formed and is very strong. It's very, or as you move, as you grow, you are moved to be part of a collective in terms of collectives, for example, within campesino communities in Latin America, or collectives because of military conflicts in the regions, like in Colombia, etc. So you are moved into a collective. You're not born into one, but you're moved into one. Or just because you change your framework and then you decide to connect with a collective, like, for example, a feminist collective, a social collective of women, because then suddenly you get integrated into a bigger sense of the collective. But basically, we have to consider the historical conditions of the formation of collectives in Latin America and how they decide to implement a learning agenda. And there are two reasons why. I mean, learning is a pathway in these collectives to social justice. So social collective activity is attached to social injustice in the region. And also learning should agree with also these the agendas of the collective, the general agendas of the collectives. So learning is not just simply related to how institutions do efforts to transform the learning spaces into more inclusive spaces. And the learning agendas of collectives are more related to their state of social inequality and lack of access to services and that response to their own necessities. And it's what some time ago was called the rebellion of the chorus. I mean, one of the main ideas of forming a collective is to get a voice, a voice for groups that do not have traditionally access to the places where their voice can be heard. That's a logic that should be understood in relation to the formation of collectives in Latin America and why they have developed their own educational agendas. Collective learning in these social collectives is associated to their resistance agenda, and that includes also the idea of this connection to the social exclusion that is experienced by these collectives is also connected to their own territories. These collectives usually move into specific territories in the region, and it's also caused by general distrust to state apparatuses. I mean, so one of the characteristics of social collectives is that they don't trust the state apparatus. They don't trust the governments. They don't trust their military organizations. They don't trust the general governmental institutions, including universities and including educational services, state educational services. They don't trust those institutions. That's why they need to create their own agendas, including their own learning agendas. One of the movements that have been very influenced in social collectives in terms of their educational agendas is obviously popular education theory that has been very popular in Latin America since the 70s and is the paradigm they've been using for organizing their agendas. Obviously, as I mentioned before, the collectives are interested in getting voice within their territories of influence, and thus has also caused that these collectives have developed their own paths and there have been earning autonomy in different ways. We have been checking the literature in the last couple of years during pandemia, and we have discovered that yes, collectives have been using technology that have been experimenting a process of appropriation and empowerment for their own agendas, educational agendas too, by using technology. And we decided to concentrate on two different ways in which collectives have been successful in getting appropriation and empowerment of their learning agendas through technology. And we're going to concentrate on two phenomena. One is One is the phenomenon of the community radio stations that had gone digital in the last decades, and the participatory video technique that have empowered a lot of these collectives, and they learned how to use them like a couple of decades ago, but now with a lot of sophisticated equipment, but that has been facilitated now with the new technology that we have right now with cell phones and stuff like that. One of the reasons why these collectives have been successful is because the access to this technology, so the technology they need to carry out their agendas has been getting cheaper and cheaper, and obviously there's new legislation that allow them to perform better, etc. So we want to concentrate our efforts in those two experiences that are also very Latin American experiences. And the way they've done it, according to literature as well, they have been reinforcing what they had learned about popular education in Latin America. They have been using this agenda and this technological advances to create a better sense of identity and reaction. And they have digitalized their voice. And one thing that is interesting through these experiences is that they have somehow expanded their territory connection, right? And that's very important. And obviously, other than modifying or abandoning their agendas, they have been reaffirming their agendas through the use of technology in these specific two cases that we're going to concentrate on. And this has been more obvious during pandemia. The social divide in Latin America is severe. Is quite rooted, deeply rooted in historical events, and is still happening. Injustice and inequality in Latin America has grown as never before, and this makes it difficult for collectives to grow into a more modern paradigm of digital transformation. And there's a sense of a communication divide between what's happening with the collectives and their educational agendas and what's happening in the formal educational institutions and their agendas. So we're concerned that we're going to find that this divide between the formal educational systems of the countries are getting apart from, are moving away from even in a deeper way from the agenda of the collectives, even though they are using the same kind of paradigms to try to expand their territory of action. So we're concerned that we're going to find that learning is still happening very much outside the Latin America university, and that universities have been unable to cope with and get into a better communication with the collectives agendas. And obviously, probably we're going to find in the different countries as we compare them that social instability is a problem for both universities and social.
2 minutes, Maynor.
Sure. And social collectives in social collectives agenda. So those are some concerns that we have and we want to explore those. And it's some concerns that are going to make it difficult for us to get a better understanding of what's happening with the collectives and their agendas. And finally, I think there are three possible scenarios that we're going to find. Either the collectives and their agendas are going to be every time more different from the agendas of the institutions, the formal institutions, or the collectives, the social collectives, and the groups that they represent, they will have to decide whether to access through social programs into the Latin America university that is getting more elitist and elitist as it goes, or they will be more dependent on a specific different kinds of universities that exist in Latin America, like, for example, the intercultural university or the popular university, etc. Or they don't have anywhere to go. They don't even, people don't have access to the collective agendas. They don't have access to the traditional Latin American university, and they won't have access to the particular popular or cultural university. And those are the scenarios that we want to see how the future is looking like. Hopefully we find that there will be a way to connect the Latin America university agendas with the collective agendas to create together and co-create in the future. And well, I want to thank you again for allowing us to participate in this program, and hopefully we can keep in touch to keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maynor, for such an interesting dive into a complex scenario from the individual learner challenges right down to what is happening at that community collective level and the divide that may even exist. If there's one picture that comes up clearly about Latin America, is the power of those collectives. And we've seen that over time, how they've unfolded within the Latin American setting. I've got a question here from Stylianos, but before I go on to that question, I just wondered, in this digital transformation and in bridging the inequities that you have seen and witnessed and have studied so deeply, are there specific tools that you think would be the enablers in possibly allowing that bridging to take place within the educational sector?
Yeah, I think that we have one way to go, and obviously we have to see the scenarios, because this is not the most common scenario, is the creation of these popular universities that some countries in Latin America have implemented for example, in the 90s, to somehow connect with the educational agendas of the territorial collectives, right? The problem with that is that it's still territorial, right? It's territorial, right? And the world is different right now, and the territory is a space of dispute, right? And if the collective and the collective's agendas and the development of these popular universities within the territories are the solution, we are going to see that these territories are going to still be separated from the rest of the national territories, right? We are seeing that in the national elections of our countries in the last month, that the communities in certain territories clearly go in one direction, and the big cities go in a different direction. And that's happening in Peru, it's happening in Mexico, it's happening in Costa Rica, it's happening everywhere. So if our efforts, if our tools are to connect the territory university with the territory agenda of collectives, that is going to create a territory problem still, right? And so I guess it has to do with the more sophisticated idea. I'm more into the idea of the open university, that is able to interconnect what's happening in the different territories within a country and outside, as a sub-region, for example, in Central America, just to give an example, because what's happening in Honduras and what's happening in Nicaragua is going to finally impact what's happening in Costa Rica or Panama, right? And so if we're unable to have a common digital territory for everybody to really interact and create new communication with new voices, we won't be able to sort of go beyond the territory divide. And I think that that's why we're interested in the community radio stations that are going digital, because they can share spaces in a better, more horizontal kind of, instant way. And radio is very treasured in our countries too. So.
Yeah, and I think treasured in many places, even here. I think within the UK, it still has its place. Stylianos had a question, which was, can you give us a couple of examples of social collectives in Latin America? And I realize I'm asking this question with less than a minute left.
Yeah, we'll have to be fast and probably mention the feminist collectives that have been becoming very strong, and they have gotten united. I mean, now we see a huge phenomenon of feminist collectives in Latin America, from Argentina to Mexico, that are getting articulated, and they're getting their voices, and they're very active in social media, and they're very active in programs, and they're really moving and they are having political impact, as the approval of abortion laws in Argentina that are creating a snowball, in the whole region. And obviously, one way to see that they are being successful is how the reaction is coming, right? And it's a very aggressive reaction against the collectives. So that means that they are being successful, because if they hadn't been successful, that reaction wouldn't have been at this level. So I think that's one way. And radio, digital radio for the collective is also being very active. Just to mention one example.
Maynor, I've got a question here from Brenna Collier, who wants your contact. So if you can put that in the chat. I think this has been a fascinating session, and we've really heard something really immensely useful for us, something that we have really engaged with: the importance of communities, the importance of health agenda, the importance of education, the importance of the digital transformation that's taking place within that educational arena. And in bridging all this, where are we placing ourselves as learners, as practitioners, as participants within our own communities? And this session has really brought everything together as a lot to look forward to. I think that's the key point that I take forward from here. We've learned a lot. We've still got a long way to go, but we have that momentum right now, and I think we should really go forward with that. And I'm really grateful to Sally, Tana, and Maynor for sharing their insights, their expertise on this wide project and topic. So thank you so much. Before I leave, I think Mark has been putting in that would the panel and would the participants also complete the online survey for the RIDE conference, and there's a link there if you could just take that and complete the evaluation form. And so I leave on a very successful note and thank all the participants, the panelists, the organizers for what has been, I think, a very successful RIDE Conference 21. So thank you very much. And a virtual clap to everybody.